"Mommy said you're my real dad," the little girl interrupted the blind date, and time froze. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above the white linen tables as soft candlelight flickered gently across polished silverware. A string quartet played a mellow jazz arrangement in the background, blending into the low murmur of elite diners. It was a scene crafted for elegance, precision, perfection, everything that described Aiden Carter. At 32, Aiden was one of the youngest CEOs in the city's history to take a family empire public. His reputation was legendary, brilliant, efficient, and emotionally impenetrable. The man across from Rebecca tonight was exactly who her parents had promised: wealthy, poised, and unattached. Rebecca crossed her legs and leaned forward with a glass of red wine in hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I have to say, this setting is almost too traditional for me," she said with a practiced laugh. "But I suppose it's what our families want, isn't it?" Aiden's jaw tensed. He nodded slightly, his eyes scanning the room instead of meeting hers. "I believe tradition is what built the company. Sentiment rarely does," he replied coolly. Rebecca's smile sharpened. "Exactly. Which is why I think we should discuss the wedding expectations early. I know my family would prefer something exclusive, minimal, no distractions." Her voice dropped half an octave. "And definitely no children at the ceremony. Or in the picture, really. They ruin the aesthetic." That was the first time Aiden blinked. Before he could respond, a piercing voice cut through the elegant calm like shattered glass. "Daddy." Heads turned, every conversation stopped. The double doors of the restaurant burst open, and in ran a little girl, no more than 3 years old. She was barefoot, her feet smudged with city dust. Her pink dress was wrinkled, slightly stained at the hem, and her curls bounced wildly with each determined step. She clutched a torn stuffed bear against her chest, its ear barely hanging on. Gasps rippled through the room as she sprinted past the maitre d', ducking between chairs and napkin-covered laps. She ran straight to Aiden. With the kind of certainty only a child could carry, she threw her arms around his leg, burying her face in the fine black fabric of his suit pants. Everyone stared. Rebecca froze. The girl looked up at him. Her eyes, large, bright blue, glassy with emotion, locked onto his. "Mommy said you're my real daddy." Silence. Even the music seemed to stop. Aiden's world tipped off balance. He stared down at the child clinging to him, speechless, frozen. Those eyes. There was something unmistakably familiar about them. The shape, the depth, the intensity. They were his. Rebecca stood slowly. Her eyes widened, her lips parting, but no words came out. Finally, she scoffed, grabbed her purse from the table, and stepped back from her chair. "This," she hissed under her breath, "is obscene." She turned and stormed out without another word. The maitre d' started toward them, panic written across his face, but Aiden raised a hand subtly. The man stopped. The little girl continued holding on to him, tiny fingers gripping the fabric tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. Aiden looked around. Every eye in the restaurant was on them, but all he could see was her. This child with tangled curls and trembling lips, barefoot and brave. He crouched down slowly, cautiously, trying not to startle her. What did you say?" His voice cracked, more vulnerable than he intended. She pointed to the stuffed bear. "I brought him too, so you know I'm serious." Aiden blinked again, as if trying to wake himself up from a dream that was somehow too vivid. Inside his chest, something shifted, sharp, unexpected. And in that moment, the bustling world around him stood completely still. Aiden Carter had built his empire on precision. While other men his age were chasing nightlife or distractions, he built companies, crushed competitors, and cultivated a reputation that made boardrooms go silent the moment he entered. He was, as the media fondly called him, the untouchable executive. never married, no long-term attachments, no scandal, no softness. In interviews, when asked why someone so eligible remained alone, his response was always the same: flat, cold, final. I was not born to be a husband, let alone a father. For Aiden, people were unpredictable, emotional, weak. Business, on the other hand, obeyed rules. It rewarded logic, loyalty, and control. That was why, when his family began insisting he settle down, he dismissed it as noise, until they brought in Rebecca, the daughter of a powerful business ally, flawless on paper, Ivy League graduate, poised in any crowd, and uninterested in emotional complications. It was a strategic match, a merger of names, wealth, and influence. He agreed to entertain the idea for one dinner, one chance to appease his family, before declining with dignity. But now, as he stood inside the restaurant, still reeling from the child's words, her tiny arms wrapped around his leg, Aiden's mind began to spin into memory. 4 years ago. The memory hit like ocean wind, sharp and sudden. He had been overseeing the acquisition of a crumbling resort town property on the coast. A storm rolled in unexpectedly. Roads flooded. He was stranded in the estate's guest villa with a fever climbing rapidly. There was no team, no driver, no assistant, just him and the storm. That was when Elise stepped in. She had been hired by the property owner's wife, a quiet housekeeper with sun-kissed skin and golden hair always tied back in a loose braid. She was younger than the rest of the staff, curious-eyed, careful with her words. But that night, when she saw Aiden pale and burning up, something in her shifted. She stayed. She brewed something warm, pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, whispered reassurances in a voice so soft it cut through the storm outside. He remembered lying there on the couch, unable to move, barely able to think, except for the softness of her fingers on his brow, the way her voice trembled when she said, "You're safe now." At some point during the night, between fever dreams and thunder, he reached for her, and she did not pull away. It was not planned, it was not like him. But in that moment, he had felt human again, fragile, alive, touched. By morning, his fever broke. By noon, his helicopter arrived. He left with a note on the counter and a schedule too packed for apologies. He never saw her again. Until now, his gaze drifted to the child still holding his leg. Barefoot, curls bouncing around her face, clinging to a bear that looked like it had survived one too many heartbreaks. Then it hit him. The eyes. Not just blue, but his blue. Not just wide, but shaped like hers. The hair. Sunlight spun into soft chaos. Elise's hair. And that tremble in her voice when she said, "Mommy said you're my real daddy." His breath caught in his throat. This could not be real. It should not be. And yet, the truth was suddenly louder than the silence around him. Elise. He remembered her standing in that old coastal kitchen, her back to him, stirring something over a flickering stove. He remembered thinking, for the briefest moment, that if he ever wanted to believe in warmth again, it might come from someone like her. But he had left, without a word, without a question. And now, the consequences of that night stood before him, 3 feet tall, barefoot, and calling him daddy. The heavy doors of the restaurant swung open once again, this time with urgency. Elise rushed in, breathless, her coat soaked near the hem from the puddles outside. Her blonde hair was tied high in a loose ponytail, strands falling out and clinging to her damp cheeks. Her eyes scanned the room, wild with panic, until they landed on the small figure still clinging to Aiden's leg. Elena. She darted forward and dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms tightly around the child. The little girl turned, her face lighting up. "Mommy, I found him! I really found Daddy!" Elise pressed her daughter into her chest, one hand gripping the back of her head, the other trembling slightly. She didn't cry. She breathed. Deep, painful breaths, like someone who had been holding it in far too long. When she finally looked up at Aiden, her gaze was calm, steady, but beneath it was exhaustion, layers of sacrifice, and sleepless nights. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice low and even. "I had no idea she would come here. I never would have allowed this." She stood slowly, adjusting her coat, which was frayed at the edges and missing a button near the collar. "I did not tell her to do it. She just wanted to see her father. Just once." Aiden stood there, silent, caught in a wave of memories and shock. Elise looked so different, and yet exactly the same. The same golden hair, the same quiet strength. He finally found his voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her lips parted, but it took a second for the words to come out. "I tried." She held his gaze with effort, as if afraid he wouldn't believe her. "I wrote you 3 times, after I found out. Then again, after she was born. I mailed the letters to your office and your family's estate. I never got a reply." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "A few months later, I went there myself. I thought maybe if they saw her, if they knew." Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. "But your housekeeper opened the door. She said I wasn't welcome, said I was looking for trouble, that you had moved on and didn't want anything to do with me." Aiden's brows furrowed. He stepped forward, lips parted, but nothing came out. Elise shook her head. "I didn't want money. I didn't want anything. I just wanted her to know where she came from, who she belonged to." She looked down at Elena, who stood quietly between them now, eyes darting from one adult to the other. A moment passed. Then the little girl stepped forward and tugged at Aiden's sleeve. "I made you something," she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled and slightly torn at one corner. "I drew this. I was going to give it to you if you were nice." She handed it to him with both hands. Aiden slowly unfolded the page. It was a drawing, a child's vision of family. A tall man in a suit, a woman with yellow hair, and a little girl in a pink dress. Above them, in crooked crayon letters, "Me and Daddy and Mommy." Aiden stared at it. For a moment, he forgot the noise of the restaurant, the curious stares, the confusion. It was just the drawing in his hand. Just the 3 of them, sketched in innocence and hope. He looked at Elena. She shifted from foot to foot, then added softly, "But I didn't think you'd want it. 'Cause maybe you don't want me." The air left his lungs. The words struck something deep, something untouched for years. He crouched down, looked into her wide blue eyes, and for the first time, truly saw her. The same eyes that had stared back at him in the mirror for 32 years. He didn't know what to say, but maybe he didn't have to. Aiden remained crouched, the child's drawing still open in his hand. The crayons had smudged, colors blending together like a dream too bright to hold. His name wasn't written, but he knew, he felt, that this was supposed to be him. But he could not let the weight of that hope crush him without certainty. He slowly stood, the paper trembling between his fingers. "How do I even know she's mine?" he said, his voice quieter than before but sharper. Elise blinked, as if the words weren't unexpected, but still painful. Her expression changed. Not anger, not outrage, something deeper, a kind of sadness worn into the soul. "I knew you'd ask that," she said gently. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't beg. She only looked him in the eyes and said, with quiet resolve, "I don't need anything from you, Aiden. Not your name, not your support, not even your belief. I've lived without those things." She glanced down at Elena, who was now sitting on the floor, tracing patterns on the carpet with her finger. "But she deserves to know where she came from. She deserves to know that she wasn't unwanted." Her eyes welled up with tears, but they didn't fall. She had learned long ago how to hold them back. "I let her believe in you," Elise continued, "because I wanted her to believe the world could be kind. I told her her father was smart and strong and brave. I didn't want to poison her heart with rejection or bitterness. I just wanted her to have a face to imagine when she looked in the mirror. Aiden's throat tightened, his jaw flexed, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned slowly toward the exit. Elise didn't call after him. She simply gathered her daughter into her arms and walked out the other way. That night, the city felt quieter than usual. Aiden sat alone in his penthouse, glass in hand, untouched scotch warming in his palm. The drawing sat on the table beside him, folded once, a bright corner peeking out like a whisper he couldn't silence. He had tried to push it away, the way Elise's voice trembled without breaking, the way Elena had looked up at him like he was her entire world, like he was supposed to be something to her. Sleep didn't come. At 3:12 a.m., he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city blink below him. His reflection stared back, stoic, cold, uncertain. What if it was true? What if everything he had missed, first steps, first words, birthdays, wasn't just possible but already gone? The guilt pressed in like a vice. The next morning at the office, Aiden arrived earlier than usual. His team scrambled to adjust, but he barely acknowledged anyone. He walked straight into his office and closed the door behind him. Less than an hour later, his assistant knocked lightly and entered with a large envelope in her hands. "This came yesterday," she said carefully, "from Miss Morgan." He took it without a word, sliding the contents onto his desk. Inside was a printed lab report and a single sticky note that read, "You deserve to know." He scanned the document. Paternity, probability, 99.9%. Aiden leaned back in his chair, the air gone from the room. There it was. Science. Proof. Truth. No more what-ifs. No more denial. Elena was his daughter. His daughter. The word sat on his tongue like a weight he didn't know how to carry. He remembered her eyes, the way she had smiled at the drawing, the way she had said "Daddy," like she had already forgiven him for not being there. Aiden pressed a hand to his forehead, then stood abruptly. Everything had changed, and he could not walk away now. Not again. The rain came in a soft drizzle, painting the windows of Aiden's car in tiny silver beads. Parked discreetly across the street, he sat in silence, watching the run-down apartment complex in the far corner of the city. A figure appeared, hurrying through the mist. Elise. She clutched a cloth grocery bag in one hand, her blonde hair pulled up carelessly, strands clinging to her face from the damp. Her coat was thin, her shoes worn, and yet she walked with quiet dignity, head held high against the cold wind. From the stairwell, a blur of pink came rushing down. "Mommy." The little girl flew into Elise's arms, her pink dress stained, her tiny feet bare against the wet pavement. Elise bent down, not caring about the rain soaking her knees, and gently wiped her daughter's feet with the edge of her coat, her eyes tender. Aiden watched, unmoving. That night, after the lights went out in the apartment, he made a quiet phone call. By morning, the leaky roof over apartment 3B was patched. The broken light in the hallway worked again. The rotting wooden handrail had been replaced with smooth, sanded oak, and on the doorstep sat a neatly wrapped box, tied with a simple white ribbon. Inside, a delicate pink dress trimmed with lace, a pair of soft cream shoes, and a small, well-loved teddy bear, stitched, cleaned, and whole again. A folded card sat on top, handwritten in slanted ink. For the little princess. Elise found the box the next morning. She knelt, touched the bear, then the dress. Her eyes glistened for a moment, but when she looked up and saw Aiden standing across the street, hands in his pockets, she straightened. "You do not need to buy forgiveness," she called out, voice firm but low. "I do not want your guilt or your money." She stepped out, rain falling around her. "She does not need a sponsor," Elise continued. "She needs someone who will sit beside her when she scrapes her knee, Someone who listens to her talk about broken dolls and dreams that make no sense. A father, not a benefactor. Aiden didn't respond. The next morning, to his surprise, Elise opened the door herself. "She wants to go to the park," she said. "If you still want to take her." He nodded once. A few minutes later, Aiden sat in the driver's seat, fumbling awkwardly with the car seat buckle. "Ow, that's not right," Elena giggled. "You're funny, Daddy. Mommy does it like this." Elise, watching from the sidewalk, couldn't help but smile, a soft, reluctant smile that trembled before it settled. At the park, the swings creaked in the breeze. Aiden pushed the swing too hard, and Elena squealed. "Not that high." "Sorry," he called, rushing forward to catch her. She laughed and flopped into his arms. Later, they sat on a bench with melting cones in hand. Elena dipped a finger into her vanilla scoop and tapped it to his nose. "Now you're silly flavor, Daddy." Aiden laughed, genuinely, for the first time in what felt like years. Before they left, he knelt to tie her shoe. Noticed a red scrape on her knee. "Does that hurt?" he asked, brushing it gently. "I brought Elsa Band-Aids. Want one?" Her eyes lit up. Yes. That evening, Elise invited him in. Dinner was plain, just eggs and boiled greens. But the small table felt warmer than any room he had dined in before. Elena proudly pulled a chair out for him. "Daddy sits here." After the meal, all three sat on the single mattress in the living room. Aiden opened a storybook and began reading. His voice was stiff at first, too formal, but Elena nestled against him, and with every word, he softened. By the second page, he was doing voices. Elise watched from the floor, arms around her knees. When Elena drifted off, her head on his shoulder, he didn't move. He carried her to bed carefully, pulled the blanket over her, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. When he stepped back, Elise handed him a chipped mug of tea. They sat together on the tiny front porch, under a sky smeared with faint stars. "I used to think you'd never know her," she whispered. He looked through the open window, where Elena slept peacefully. "I used to think I never needed anyone," he said quietly. "Now I'm not so sure." The next morning, Aiden sat in his office, the envelope still lying open on his desk like an exposed nerve. The silence was different now, not peaceful, but heavy, restless. He stared out the window, watching the city move far below, then picked up the phone. "I want a full background check," he told his investigator. 3 years back, any correspondence from Elise Morgan. Letters, calls, visits, anything my family or staff might have intercepted. "Yes, sir," came the reply. Discreetly? Very. 2 days later, the report arrived. Aiden opened it with steady hands, but his jaw clenched as he read. 3 letters, all addressed to him, one sent within weeks after his coastal trip, the second when Elise learned she was pregnant, and the last after Elena was born. All stamped, dated, never opened, intercepted by household staff and forwarded to his mother's office. Marked, handled. The report went on. Elise had come to the estate once. She brought a photograph and tried to speak with him directly. She never made it past the front gate. The order to turn her away had come from Eleanor Carter herself. Aiden set the file down slowly. He closed his eyes. His mother hadn't just interfered. She had erased Elise's voice, her presence, her chance to be heard. She had taken his right to know he had a daughter. He drove to the Carter estate without warning. The guards let him in on sight. The roses in the garden bloomed bright, trimmed into obedient shapes. Everything perfect. Everything curated. His mother was seated in the sunroom, sipping tea from her favorite porcelain set, her pearls resting elegantly at her collar. "Darling," she said, smiling without looking up from her cup. "Rebecca's family called this morning. They've already booked a venue for September. I told them we'd confirm by. You had no right. The smile faded. Eleanor slowly looked up. Excuse me? You heard me, Aiden said, voice controlled, but shaking at the edges. You intercepted letters that were meant for me. You turned her away. You made sure I never knew I had a daughter. Eleanor set down her cup. The sound of porcelain on glass, sharp and cold. I protected you. No, Aiden snapped, stepping forward. You controlled me. I spared you scandal, she said, her voice rising. Do you know what a child with a housemaid would have done to your career? To this family? I missed her first words, her first steps. 3 years I will never get back. She is not part of our world. She is my daughter, he roared, and for the first time in his life, Eleanor flinched. I could have handled it, he continued. I should have been there. You didn't protect me. You took everything from me and called it love. His mother stood, her spine stiff with pride. You are a Carter. You have responsibilities. He met her eyes squarely. I am a father now, and that is the only responsibility I care about. She stared at him, fury and disbelief battling in her eyes. You would throw away everything, she hissed. For them? I would throw away this entire empire, Aiden said calmly, before I let my daughter grow up thinking she was a mistake. He turned to leave. You walk out now, Eleanor said sharply, and the family will disown you. You'll lose your place. Your name. Aiden paused at the threshold, then looked back over his shoulder. Then I guess it's time I started building something worth having a name for. He left the estate and never looked back. That night, he called off the engagement with Rebecca. The press spun stories. The shareholders panicked, but Aiden didn't care. For the first time, he was not being led by legacy or expectation. He was choosing something real. He was choosing his daughter. The sky was streaked with orange as the sun dipped low over the city's skyline, casting long shadows between the apartment buildings. What started as an ordinary evening turned to chaos in seconds. Thick smoke poured from a second-story window of the housing complex where Elise and Elena lived. Flames danced violently behind cracked glass. Screams echoed through the narrow alleyways. Neighbors gathered in panic. Some were calling 911. Others tried to use buckets of water to douse the fire from below. Help! My boy's still inside. A frantic mother sobbed outside the burning apartment. Her son, no more than 4 years old, had been trapped when the fire broke out in the kitchen. Without hesitation, Elise passed Elena into a neighbor's arms. Stay with her, she said, her voice clear, even through the fear. Mommy, Elena cried, but Elise had already turned and was running straight into the smoke. The flames surged. Heat licked the stairwell. Elise shielded her mouth with her coat and moved through the thick smoke by instinct, guided only by the faint, terrified sobs of the child. She found him curled up behind a chair, coughing, crying, eyes wide with fear. It's okay, sweetheart, she said, lifting him into her arms. I've got you. With strength fueled by pure will, she carried him back through the heat. The smoke stung her eyes. Her lungs burned. The world tilted. But she made it to the doorway. She passed the boy to the waiting arms of a firefighter. Then everything went black. Aiden was in a meeting when the call came. He didn't ask for details. He just ran. By the time he reached the hospital, his heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through every vein. The emergency ward smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. And in the middle of it sat Elena, alone, small, and shaking. She looked up. The moment she saw him, she broke. Daddy! He dropped to his knees, and she launched into his arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Daddy, Mommy went into the fire. She saved Jaden, but now she won't wake up. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, his voice cracking. She's going to be okay, baby. She has to be. Elena's hands clutched the front of his coat. "Don't let her go. Please. Don't let Mommy leave us." Tears streamed down Aiden's face. He did not try to hide them. It was the first time he had cried in front of anyone since he was a child, and it was for the woman who had shown him what it meant to feel again. Elise lay pale and still in the hospital bed, an oxygen mask over her face, IV lines running from her arms. Her left side was bandaged from shoulder to elbow. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Aiden sat beside her, one hand holding hers gently, the other stroking her hair back from her forehead. "She saved a child tonight," the nurse had whispered. "They say she didn't even hesitate." Aiden's chest ached. He leaned in, his voice just above a whisper. "You saved me too. That night, years ago, you stayed. When I was at my worst, you saw something worth saving." His fingers tightened around hers. "And now it's my turn." He looked at her face, willing her to open her eyes. "I need you to come back to us, Elise. I need you. She needs you." A long, silent pause. Then just barely her fingers twitched. He straightened. Her eyes fluttered, then slowly opened, hazy but familiar. "Aiden," she breathed, her voice hoarse. "I'm here." She tried to speak again, but he shook his head gently and leaned down. "You took care of me that night when I didn't deserve it," he whispered. "Now let me take care of you, for every night that comes." Elise's lips curved, faint but certain. She squeezed his hand. And for the first time, love had nothing left to prove. It simply stayed. The chapel stood quietly by the sea, its white walls glowing under the golden afternoon sun. Waves rolled gently against the shore, a soft wind stirring the air with the scent of salt and wildflowers. Inside, it was simple. Wooden pews, modest floral arrangements. No crowd, just the people who mattered. Elise stood at the front in a flowing white dress, elegant in its simplicity. Her blonde hair fell softly over her shoulders, catching the sunlight through the stained glass. She held a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite since childhood. By her side, Elena beamed with pride. The little girl wore a pale pink dress with lace trim, a ribbon tied perfectly in the back. In her arms, she held the same teddy bear from the restaurant, clean, mended, whole. Her fingers curled lovingly around its paw as if it were a guest of honor. The music swelled gently as Aiden walked down the aisle toward them. He wore no tie, no flash, just a quiet smile and eyes filled with something deeper than anyone had ever seen in him, peace. At the altar, he bent down on one knee beside Elena. He touched her cheek and whispered, loud enough for Elise to hear, "Because of you, I found the most precious thing in the world, a family." Elena's smile stretched across her face. Then he stood and took Elise's hands. No grand speeches, no practiced vows, just a promise in his eyes, a promise he had never made to anyone else. They were married with the ocean as their witness, and as they stepped outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the horizon. Elena ran ahead, skipping in the sand, her laughter echoing like music. Aiden and Elise followed, their fingers entwined. The breeze played in Elise's hair, the sunlight dancing in their daughter's curls. 3 silhouettes walked along the shoreline, one tall, one gentle, one small and joyful, together at last. And, for the first time, Aiden Carter had everything he never knew he needed. Not in the city skyline, not in the contracts or legacy, but right here, in a little girl's hand and the woman who never gave up on hope. Thank you for watching this heartwarming journey of love, redemption, and the family that fate almost kept apart. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more are waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales for more emotional stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that kindness always finds a way. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale that could change your day or your life. because sometimes the smallest hands bring the biggest miracles. Subscribe now to Kindness and Love Tales.